Now, in the most recent video I made, I took a Corsair power supply box and strapped 2 fans to it, put some ice in it, and tried to cool a PC with it. Didn't go amazingly, you can go check out the results for yourself. But while I was busy working on that and looking at the box, I thought, it looks remarkably ITX PC sized, so I decided to build a computer in it. Now, I've been watching a lot of Optimum tech videos lately, and he makes ITX look so desirable. Every time I watch one of his videos, I just want to take my wallet out and buy something with it. But ITX cases are pretty expensive. So that's why I think the premise of this video is quite good, because you get a box with power supplies. So it's essentially a free case for you to build a PC in. And then what I'm also going to do with this video is I'm going to throw the gauntlet down. Optimum Tech, if you're watching this video, I challenge you to build an even better ITX case than I build in this video. Now, I know this is most likely not going to happen, but if it does, I'm just going to set down a couple rules. You can use whatever material it is that you want. So if you have the ability to fabricate metal into a case, go for it. And we're going to judge it on looks and whether or not it thermal throttles. So I guess a score out of 10 for looks and 5 points if it doesn't thermally throttle. Spoiler, I may already have lost 5 points. And with that, let's get into the build process. Now, before I forget, let's just have a quick look at all of the components that I'm using for this build. Now, as far as the CPU goes, I'm using an AMD 2400G. The reason I'm using the CPU is because it's amazing value for money. It's actually quite difficult for me to buy anything else because it works quite well. And I recently did tests comparing various core configurations of AMD setup for gaming. And honestly, anything above 4 cores and 8 threads didn't seem to make much of a difference when it came to actual gaming performance at the same clock speed. And then I've got 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz G-Skill RAM. I've got a GTX 1660 Ti. It's an Asus Phoenix variant, which was the only one I had immediately available to me that could actually fit in an ITX case, although fit is subjective, we'll get into that a bit later. As far as a motherboard goes, I'm using an ITX MSI B450 motherboard. It's one of the more basic AMD ITX motherboards, but again, it's quite good value for money. And then as far as the power supply goes, I have a Corsair SF600. I have the 600 watt variant because that's, again, the only one I could get my hands on short notice. And it's a bit overkill for this system. And if you're building your own variant of the system, I'd actually recommend going for the SF450 instead, because it would be sufficient. As far as an SSD goes, I have an M.2 SATA WD Blue Edition 250 gig SSD, but I'll have all of these components linked in the description below if you want to build a similar PC. Now, first things first, let's just appreciate how absolutely tiny this power supply is. Is it not the cutest thing ever? So my current thought process about how I want to install the system is I actually want all of the I/O to go into the back of the box so that the Corsair logo shows up forward. I'm gonna have a fan in here and a fan in here, and then hopefully we're gonna have some pretty good cross airflow through the box. And it's going to look pretty cool, hopefully, because we're going to have, yeah, it's just going to be like a power supply box with a PC in it. So I think the best way to go about that then is to actually place the PC. I kind of think this way around. Wow, that's a really close fit. So this way around, like that. And I'm actually going to have to put the fans on the outside of the box. I think that's going to be the best way around this issue. And then this little power supply is going to go in on this side like that. And again, as you can see, the fans are definitely going to have to go on the outside of the case because it's a pretty tight fit, if I'm honest. And actually this graphics card is going to block most of the airflow. So we're going to have to find a way around that. So let me cut out the holes for the rear I/O, get the components settled in, and then I can decide on an actual airflow configuration. was way more of a kind of difficult job than I realized, because I didn't realize how many levels of cardboard I was actually going to have to cut through. So unfortunately, it's not the neatest job ever. But now that I'm finished, it looks better than I thought it would. So let's try and fit the motherboard in here and see how well the holes and stuff I made actually lines up. Fairly well, except the graphics card doesn't fit through the hole. What I've done is I've actually cut a hole in there so that the bottom of the PCI Express bracket can go through there. And I've actually put the case on these little IKEA feet so that it's elevated a bit. So hopefully that means the graphics card will go far enough down that it can actually fit through the hole. So let's see how that goes. Now the reason that I specifically did that as opposed to cutting this hole bigger is because the box doesn't actually close over the graphics card at the elevation that it's at now. So let's test that out now. Yeah, it does actually close. It just closes, but it does close. Now, as you can tell, there's not a huge amount of cable management actually going on in here. There's a lot stuffed in here. This mass of cables is really difficult to deal with. And that's actually one of the issues with this power supply, is that those cables aren't very flexible, so they're putting quite a lot of strain on the outside of the box. But then there's this guy as well, which I don't want to put too much pressure on because I don't want to like damage the graphics card or anything like that. But this is the configuration that we have up and running now. Or, well, I mean, that we've got in the box now. And honestly, it fits really well, except for it's a little bit too low. Now, Optimum Tech, I can tell with certainty that this build isn't quite as glamorous as any of your ITX builds. So we're gonna start it up, we're gonna see how it runs, and then we're gonna get to some B-roll. I actually think, despite how janky this case looks, it's pretty cool. Cool in a very, very figurative sense, because literally it isn't cool. So before we get into the benchmarks, when I actually started testing gaming performance on this system, I started running into serious thermal throttling with the graphics card. Now, the first thing that I thought was that the exhaust fan was actually competing with the fan on the graphics card. So I switched the exhaust fan around and turned it into an intake fan so that it blew fresh air straight into the graphics card. This helped, but not significantly. It took the temperatures down from 87 degrees to 87 degrees, but with slightly less thermal throttling. So then what I realized is it's a cardboard box. You can open and close it. So I invented a gaming mode for this case, which basically turns this ITX case into a transformer, which has to gain me some points against whatever it is that Optimum Tech is going to build. Now let's have a quick look at the transformed version of the case. With that out of the way, let's get into the actual benchmarks. Now, I benchmarked 7 games at 1080p, all of them at ultra settings, because it is a GTX 1660 Ti, so it should be able to game at 1080p 60 frames per second at ultra settings at least. So let's see how it did. actually don't think this PC performs too badly. The average frame rates are quite high, but one thing that's a bit disappointing is the 0.1% lows. Now, I don't know if this is due to actual thermal throttling, but I have to say I did run all of the tests in the game mode, so it means the thermal performance was a little bit better. The only other thing that I can think of is that it's down to the CPU, but honestly the CPU wasn't thermal throttling at all and it was running quite well. Although the core speed on the CPU wasn't very high. Whatever the reason was, the 0.1% lows are a little bit disappointing. And with that, it kind of brings me to the end of this video. Now, Optimum Tech, I really hope that you watch this video and that you pick up my gauntlet. I know that you have a big channel and that you're probably quite busy, but if you have the time, I'd be really interested to see what you come up with, because you have a lot of experience when it comes to ITX builds, so I'm sure you'll be able to build something better than mine. Although mine is pretty badass. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, do like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I've got an Instagram and Twitter account, so you can go and check those out for stuff and things. And until the next video, bye-bye.